Your Paycheck Protection Out of Funding Update. As promised, I am digging and digging and digging for any information I can find on the funding that is left for the Paycheck Protection Program, anything we can glean from the SBA, from my various lender sources, and the potential for new funding to be allocated here. So I'm back at you with an entirely new update covering everything we know as of today. That way you can stay in the know and understand, like, hey, am I actually going to get this PPP funding? Because I know there's a ton of uncertainty in the air right now. If you're sitting with some kind of processing status on your PPP loan, or it's hung up at the SBA, or you just recently applied and you don't know whether you're going to get funding. So let's just give all the facts and figures that we know right now. That way you can leave this video just feeling a little bit calmer. That's my goal. Always feel a little bit calmer, because there is a silver lining here. So here's the situation. The SBA did an extremely poor job reporting the figures as to what was left for the Paycheck Protection Program. And this has caused a kind of cavalcade of issues, as the reporting didn't include certain line items, which we'll cover in a second here. And lenders, Congress, and the White House all thought that there was more funding left for this program than expected. And people were starting to think, hey, this funding might actually last through the entire program and we'll be good to go, because there's a million or so businesses that have yet to be funded. But it still seems to line up that, hey, this could actually work out, which was a bit of a surprise, because original funding for this program was allocated based on net income calculations, not gross income calculations. So of course there's a completely different need based on gross income, because for a lot of people, that's the difference between receiving nothing, or like $1,000, and receiving $15,000. So there's people receiving much larger loans and far more people applying for the program because it's more lucrative to do so. So there was an expectation that it would run out quickly. However, over time, we were thinking, oh, this might actually last. And then we realized, okay, the reporting was just very, very poorly done. And that's kind of been an issue all along with these programs. Just the reporting of the facts and figures seems to always be delayed and obfuscated, and just that doesn't always make sense. And this is no exception to that rule. So the total funding that was left as of the other day was just over $30 billion in funding. And of that, there was $13 billion that was actually to be allocated for lender fees. Now, I want to mention all of these breakdowns again, because I received a ton of questions and I want to give some clarification. So of that 30 billion, 13 billion was actually supposed to go to lender fees. A lot of people heard that and they're like, why are lenders receiving 30, 40% of all funding? That's where all the money's going. It doesn't exactly work like that. That was lender fees from previous loans approved as well. Don't get me wrong, lenders make a lot of money from processing these loans. Unfortunately, that's kind of a necessary evil, and it was a change in the second round of the Paycheck Protection Program to make it so they actually serviced small loans. Because if you remember, maybe you don't even remember, because there was very little interest in this program in the first round in last year, but there was a major issue where the smallest loans, those without employees, were basically getting screwed. They weren't getting any funding. Banks weren't even looking at them because the incentives weren't there, because it was based on a percentage of the total loan size. So lenders were like, why would I focus on these $2,000 loans when I can do this business loan for $200,000, make 10 times the money, 100 times the money, and it's the same amount of work. So they changed up the structure to make it more of a flat rate fee for lenders. So it's more lucrative for lenders, and then that benefits you. So yes, lenders make a lot of money, but it's not like 40% of the total funding. It's like 1% or something like that. Next, there was $3 billion of that $30 billion that is allocated for new loans, which that is great. That means people who recently applied are allocated in about 10% of that funding that is remaining, which is very exciting. And then $6 billion of that is left for hold codes and intake, which is another very, very exciting aspect of this, because those hold codes are people who are stuck at the SBA. So like someone who applied through multiple lenders, and for whatever reason, the SBA system thinks that you're trying to get multiple PPP loans, or the SBA system thinks that you had a bankruptcy when you didn't, or maybe there's actually a legitimate issue on your application. For whatever reason, there's about 40 different hold codes. If you're hung up with one of those hold codes, the SBA is actually considering those loans as funded, which is good news. I've spoken to a few lenders and they're saying that this basically means those people with hold codes that are fixable. Of course, if your hold code is not fixable, then it doesn't count. You're just not going to get funding. But if your hold code is fixable, your funding is actually allocated there, and that's a part of the $6 billion. And I know there's a group of people, there's kind of like it's a situation where like 80 to 90% of people get funding no problem, and then 10 to 20% get just various issues for whatever reason. It's kind of impossible to know because there's a million different things that could happen. But there's $6 billion there that is for those people, which is very exciting. And then $8 billion is for CFI CDFI institutions, which is just minority institutions. And that was a bit of a surprise because there was no mention of that being separated until funding was basically run out. So it's like, why didn't you, explain that ahead of time? But I'm not here to conjecture why, they didn't say what they didn't say. So $8 billion of that is for minority institutions, which is good for minority business owners because it's going to make it a little bit easier for you to secure a loan. And there's a little bit of confusion here as well because I've seen certain ads and I've seen a lot of comments about ads where companies will say, hey, every other PPP company is out of funding, but we're not. And that's kind of a truth and a lie when you see those ads, because all that means is they have lenders who are CFI, CDFIs, which most PPP aggregate companies who take in applications and then process it through multiple banks have CDI, CDFI banks as part of their portfolio of lenders they use. Most of them do. So if you see an ad that says, hey, we have funding when no one else does, it's not exactly true. It's just part of that $8 billion. And if you want to apply for another loan directly through a CFI, CDFI, you can do so. But at this time, it's kind of hard to know exactly what's going to happen. It's still a situation where if you have yet to apply at all and you want to apply, you're still better off applying than not, because if more funding gets allocated, you'll just be a little bit earlier in the queue of getting processed once that gets allocated. So it's like one of those situations where it doesn't hurt to apply if you have yet to apply. And I hope if you're subscribed to my channel, you've probably already applied. Most people have already been funded, and those people probably aren't even watching this video because they're like, that was so last month. But I'm here till the bitter end to help each and every person who has yet to be funded. That way I can just kind of help navigate through the process here. And that's why you should subscribe to this channel. That way you don't miss anything regarding the PPP, the EIDL, or any other finance news that makes you money. Now there's a new category here, which is actually going to add even more funding for those who are still sitting and processing. And that category is fraudsters. So actually we're in a situation where all the fraudsters here, because there's so many fraudulent loans and people are finally getting scared about processing these fraudulent loans or trying to submit these fraudulent loans, there's a ton of people returning those loans. So here's how the scam works if you aren't aware. Basically, there's a ton of people. It's literally become a meme at this point. Like, what are you going to spend your fake PPP money on? It's honestly stresses me out that people are so lackadaisical about getting these fake loans. But basically, they make things like fake tax returns, fake entities, fake bank statements in order to submit a paycheck protection loan under this fake entity and show that they make $100,000 a year or whatever they need to show to get the loan size they're aiming for. And people will offer these services for anywhere from like $75 up to like $5,000 to make these fake documents, get people to process those loans, and they get their cut. And then all the risk is on the people who are submitting those fake loans. And there's really three major areas where people can get caught. The first area is, of course, just applying. That's the lowest risk. Second is forgiveness. And things are going to change up here. It's probably going to be a little bit more difficult for forgiveness, especially if there's suspicion on your PPP application. I wouldn't want to be in that boat. And then third, the IRS is actually going to check tax returns to make sure that your PPP was actually spent for these fraudulent loans. Now, this is a situation for honest, upright, legitimate small business owners. Really, you should not have to worry, because you'll still be forgiven if you just follow the general criteria. You'll be okay. But these fraudsters, some of them are rightfully getting scared, hopefully some from my videos warning people, and they're starting to return some of these loans. And I've spoken to some lenders, and I'm estimating about $3 billion worth of fraudulent loans are actually in the process of being returned, which means much more money for legitimate business owners who can actually get funding here. So breaking all these various categories down, the average loan size is $46,000. So we have $3 billion in new loans that are being processed. Of that total $30 billion left in funding, that's about 65,000 businesses who have funding on the way. We have $6 billion for those hold codes. That's 130,000 businesses who are stuck in some kind of processing loop who will still get funded. 130,000 businesses. $8 billion for CFIs, CDFIs, the minority institutions. That's another 174,000 loans that have not been funded yet that will still get funded. And then we have an additional $3 billion in returned fraud for an additional 130,000 approved businesses. So there's that many fraudulent loans to fund 130,000 additional legitimate businesses. That's mind-blowing, and that's just the people who returned it. Of course, that's still a very small percentage compared to the total funding for the Paycheck Protection Program, which is about $1 trillion. So that's less than 1%, but it's still pretty significant that it can help out, 130,000 legitimate small business owners by just the people who return that. So that's a total of 499,000 loans yet to be funded that there's still funding for. So there's still hope, even if there's not additional funding allocated. There's been about 10 million approvals so far in the history of the Paycheck Protection Program. So that comes out to about an additional 5% in approvals, which it's better than nothing, but it's not going to get us all the way to the finish line. So there's still some work. Also, something I want to note here, that the $30 billion that was left as of the other day does not count funding that was already allocated. Basically, it's been approved. The SBA is either in the process of funding the lender or the lender is in the process of funding you. That's already accounted for in the $30 billion and not even a part of that. So that's not even a part of the 30 billion because remember the funding went from like 43 billion to about 30 billion in that week span. So what this means, because funding can take upwards of 20 days after you're actually approved and like money is supposed to go to your bank account, it can take upwards of 20 days. So because of that, and the SBA was approving about $1.4 billion every single day in new loans, there could easily be an additional 500,000 businesses that are already approved and have funding on the way. So that's an additional 5%, the total aggregate, completed loans that haven't yet been funded, for a total of 10% more loans, about 1 million loans that will still be funded that have not been funded yet. And I can absolutely tell you this is the case because I've received many messages in the last couple of days who are like, this program ran out of funding. I just got funded today. I cannot believe it. Lord have mercy, I got funded. So there is some hope here for those who have not been funded and you're still waiting, because I have heard of a lot of people who have gotten funding in the last couple of days. So that is very exciting, and I think there's more to go. But of course, this doesn't account for everyone. We don't want anyone who is legitimate to be left out of this program, so the fight is not over yet. I'm keeping a close eye on any bills that are being proposed on more PPP funding, what the committees are saying. I'm talking to as many people as I can here. As of right now, we still don't have anything on the House floor or the Senate floor, but I believe, I try not to be too over-optimistic, too over-hyped about these things, but I believe that the odds are more likely than not that we get funding, but we really need to, as individuals, help force this push. So if it's at all possible for you to contact your local representatives, you should do so. Give them a call, send them an email, whatever you need to do, contact your local representatives and say like, hey, I applied for the PPP loan. My business is struggling. It's going to run out of funding. I'm concerned. Can you please help push something forward here? And that will help. But I'm optimistic about this. I think there's a solid chunk of people who will still get funded, who haven't yet been funded. And I'm really hoping that we get more funding allocated here. That way, everyone can just get their legitimate PPP loan. That would absolutely make my year. So thank you for tuning into this update. I would like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day, and I hope you get your funding. Goodbye.